Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix, known commonly as Sulla, was a Roman general and statesman. He had the distinction of holding the office of consul twice, as well as reviving the dictatorship. Sulla was awarded a grass crown, the most prestigious and rarest Roman military honor, during the Social War. His life was habitually included in the ancient biographical collections of leading generals and politicians, originating in the biographical compendium of famous Romans published by Marcus Terentius Varro. In Plutarch's Parallel Lives, Sulla is paired with the Spartan general and strategist Lysander. Sulla's dictatorship came during a high point in the struggle between Optimates and Populares, the former seeking to maintain the power of the oligarchy in the form of the Senate, while the latter resorted in many cases to naked populism, culminating in Caesar's dictatorship. Sulla was a highly original, gifted and skillful general. Never losing a battle, he remains the only man in history to have attacked and occupied both Athens and Rome. His rival, Gnaeus Papirius Carbo, described Sulla as having the cunning of a fox and the courage of a lion, but that it was the former attribute that was by far the most dangerous. This mixture was later referred to by Machiavelli in his description of the ideal characteristics of a ruler. In a dispute over the Eastern Army command fomented by Marius, who wanted the Mithridatic command for himself, and during a period of extreme instability in Rome, Sulla unconstitutionally marched his armies into Rome and defeated Marius in battle. After his second march on Rome, he revived the office of dictator, which had been inactive since the Second Punic War over a century before. After seeking election to and holding a second consulship, he retired to private life and died shortly after. Sulla's decision to seize power, ironically enabled by his rivals' military reforms that bound the army's loyalty with the general rather than to Rome, permanently destabilized the Roman power structure. Later leaders like Julius Caesar would follow his precedent in attaining political power through force. Early years. Sulla was born into a branch of the patrician gens Cornelia, but his family had fallen to an impoverished condition at the time of his birth. Lacking ready money, Sulla spent his youth amongst Rome's comics, actors, lute players, and dancers. Sulla retained an attachment to the debauched nature of his youth until the end of his life. Plutarch mentions that during his last marriage, to Valeria, he still kept company with actresses, musicians, and dancers, drinking with them on couches night and day. It seems certain that Sulla received a good education. Sallust declares him well-read and intelligent, and he was fluent in Greek, which was a sign of education in Rome. The means by which Sulla attained the fortune which later would enable him to ascend the ladder of Roman politics, the cursus honorum, are not clear, although Plutarch refers to two inheritances, one from his stepmother and the other from a low-born, but rich, unmarried lady. In older sources, his name may be found as Sylla. This is a Hellenism, like silver for classical Latin silver, reinforced by the fact that our two major sources, Plutarch and Appian, wrote in Greek, and call him Sigma Upsilon Lambda Lambda Alpha. Capture of Jugurtha. The Jugurthine War had started in 112 BC when Jugurtha, grandson of Massinissa of Numidia, claimed the entire kingdom of Numidia in defiance of Roman decrees and divided it between several members of the royal family. Rome declared war on Jugurtha in 111 BC, but for 5 years Roman legions under Quintus Caius Aelius Metellus were unsuccessful. Gaius Marius, a lieutenant of Metellus, saw an opportunity to usurp his commander and fed rumors of incompetence and delay to the publican eye in the region. These machinations caused cause for Metellus's removal, despite delaying tactics by Metellus. In 107 BC Marius returned to Rome to stand for the consulship. Marius was elected consul and took over the campaign while Sulla was nominated quaestor to him. Under Marius, the Roman forces followed a very similar plan as under Metellus and ultimately defeated the Numidians in 106 BC, thanks in large part to Sulla's initiative in capturing the Numidian king. He had persuaded Jugurtha's father-in-law, King Bocchus I of Mauritania, to betray Jugurtha, who had fled to Mauritania for refuge. It was a dangerous operation from the first, with King Bocchus weighing up the advantages of handing Jugurtha over to Sulla or Sulla over to Jugurtha. The publicity attracted by this feat boosted Sulla's political career. A gilded equestrian statue of Sulla donated by King Bocchus was erected in the forum to commemorate his accomplishment. Although Sulla had engineered this move, as Sulla was serving under Marius at the time, Marius took credit for this feat. Cimbri and the Teutones. In 104 BC, the migrating Germanic-Celtic alliance headed by the Cimbri and the Teutones seemed to be heading for Italy. As Marius was the best general Rome had, the Senate allowed him to lead the campaign against them. Sulla served on Marius' staff as tribunus militium during the first half of this campaign. Sulla had by this time transferred to the army of Catulus to serve as his legatus, and is credited as being the prime mover in the defeat of the tribes. Victorious at virtually, Marius and Catulus were both granted triumphs as the co-commanding generals. Cilician governorship. Returning to Rome, Sulla was praetor urbanus for 97 BC. In c. 95 BC he was appointed proconsul to the province of Cilicia. While in the east, Sulla was the first Roman magistrate to meet her Parthian ambassador, Orobizush, and by taking the seat between the Parthian ambassador and the ambassador from Cappadocia he, perhaps unintentionally, slighted the Parthian king by portraying the Parthians and the Cappadocians as equals. The Parthian ambassador, Orobizush, was executed upon his return to Parthia for allowing this humiliation. It was at this meeting he was told by a Chaldean seer that he would die at the height of his fame and fortune. This prophecy was to have a powerful hold on Sulla throughout his lifetime. In 94 BC Sulla repulsed the forces of Tigranes the Great of Armenia from Cappadocia. Later in 94 BC Sulla left the east and returned to Rome, where he aligned himself with the Optimates in opposition to Gaius Marius. Social war. The social war resulted from Rome's intransigence regarding the civil liberties of the Socii, Rome's Italian allies. The Socii were old enemies of Rome that submitted, whereas the Latins were confederates of longer standing with Rome. Therefore the Latins were given more respect and better treatment. Subjects of the Roman Republic, these Italian provincials might be called to arms in its defense or might be subjected to extraordinary taxes, but they had no say in the expenditure of these taxes or in the uses of the armies that might be raised in their territories. The social war was, in part, caused by the continued rebuttal of those who sought to extend Roman citizenship to the Socii and to address various injustices inherent in the Roman system. The Gracchi, Tiberius and Gaius, were successively killed by Optimate supporters who sought to maintain the status quo. The assassination of Marcus Livius Drusus the Younger, whose reforms were intended not only to strengthen the position of the Senate but also to grant Roman citizenship to the allies, greatly angered the Socii. In consequence, most allied against Rome, leading to the outbreak of the social war. At the beginning of the social war, the Roman aristocracy and Senate were beginning to fear Gaius Marius's ambition, which had already given him 6 consulships. They were determined that he should not have overall command of the war in Italy. In this last rebellion of the Italian allies, Sulla outshone both Marius and the consul Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo. In 89 BC Sulla captured Eclanum, the chief town of the Herpini, by setting the wooden breastwork on fire. As a result of his success in bringing the social war to a successful conclusion, he was elected consul for the first time in 88 BC, with Quintus Pompeius Rufus as his colleague. Sulla served exceptionally as a general during the social war. At Nola he was awarded a corona obsidianalis, also known as a corona graminea. This was the highest Roman military honor, awarded for personal bravery to a commander who saves a Roman legion or army in the field. Unlike all other Roman military honors, it was awarded by acclamation of the soldiers of the rescued army, and consequently very few were ever awarded. The crown, by tradition, was woven from grasses and other plants taken from the actual battlefield. First march on Rome. As consul, Sulla prepared to depart once more for the east, to fight the First Mithridatic War, by the appointment of the Senate. But he would leave trouble behind him. Marius was now an old man, but he still wanted to lead the Roman armies against King Mithridates VI of Pontus. Before leaving for the east, Sulla and his colleague Quintus Pompeius Rufus blocked legislation of the tribune Publius Sulpicius Rufus to ensure the rapid organization of the Italian allies within the Roman citizenship. When Sulpicius found an ally in Marius who would support the bill, he had his supporters riot. Sulla returned to Rome from the siege at Nola to meet with Pompeius Rufus. However, Sulpicius' followers attacked the meeting, forcing Sulla to take refuge in Marius' house, who then forced him to support Sulpicius' pro-Italian legislation. Sulla's own son-in-law was killed in those riots. After Sulla left Rome again for Nola, Sulpicius called an assembly to reverse the Senate's decision on Sulla's command, transferring it to Marius. Sulpicius also used the assemblies to eject senators from the Roman Senate until there were not enough senators to form a quorum. Violence in the forum ensued. Some nobles tried to lynch Sulpicius, but failed in the face of his bodyguard of gladiators. Sulla received news of this at the camp of his victorious social war veterans, waiting in the south of Italy to cross to Greece. He announced the measures that had been taken against him, and his soldiers stoned the envoys of the assemblies who came to announce that the command of the Mithridatic War had been transferred to Marius. Sulla then took 6 of his most loyal legions and marched on Rome. This was an unprecedented event. No general before him had ever crossed the city limits, the Pomo Irium, with his army. Most of his commanders refused to accompany him. Sulla justified his actions on the grounds that the Senate had been neutered and the Mos Maiorum had been offended by the Senate's negation of the rights of the year's consuls to fight the year's wars. Armed gladiators were unable to resist organized Roman soldiers, and although Marius offered freedom to any slave that would fight with him against Sulla, he and his followers were forced to flee the city. Sulla consolidated his position, declared Marius and his allies hostis, and addressed the Senate in harsh tones, portraying himself as a victim, presumably to justify his violent entrance into the city. After restructuring the city's politics and strengthening the Senate's power, Sulla returned to his camp and proceeded with the original plan of fighting Mithridates in Pontus. Sulpicius was betrayed and killed by one of his slaves, whom Sulla subsequently freed and then executed. Marius, however, fled to safety in Africa. With Sulla out of Rome, Marius plotted his return. During his period of exile, Marius became determined that he would hold a 7th consulship, as foretold by the Sibyl decades earlier. By the end of 87 BC, Marius returned to Rome with the support of Lucius Cornelius Cinna and, in Sulla's absence, took control of the city. Marius declared Sulla's reforms and laws invalid and officially exiled Sulla. Marius and Cinna were elected consuls for the year 86 BC. Marius died a fortnight after, and Cinna was left in sole control of Rome.